this is an often overlooked area of critical home support and structural support. Most often, people are just annoyed by their placement when they're trying to do a finished room downstairs and that they really wish to have them out of there. But as a house is weighted onto the foundation, the whole middle of your house is generally going to be loaded onto columns that are then put onto concrete pads in the floor. With a new home construction, there's very standard design practices and code requirements that require certain spacing based on structural loads of a house. But how do you know when it's time to look at replacing these elements if they might be compromised, undersized, or having issues where you feel like you have really bouncy floors upstairs? In older homes, you're not going to have today's design practices. If we go back and rewind the clock to 100 years, you'll see stone foundations, and stone foundations will not have permanent lally columns as their primary support. More often than not, you'll actually have a tree trunk, an old tree trunk that sits on a granite stone or some sort of stone, or potentially just right on the concrete pad itself, and that's going to be what is supporting the house and major interior sections of the home. Also, what you might see is you might see temporary lally columns, which are the ones that you can get from large hardware stores that have kind of a screw top on them, and they're hollow on the inside. And both of these are really subject to needing to be looked at. The wood columns that are there have been probably squished down a little bit, if not a lot, which gives you lots of bows in the floor and kind of bounciness in the floor. The other thing too is that as the wood ages, it dries out, and as it starts to dry, you'll see large splits and checks in the actual columns. And these are subject to kind of having major sort of deficiencies over time because they can actually open up. When it comes to temporary columns, you really should only be using those for a maximum of 180 days as per code. These are really meant to be temporary support, maybe take a little bit of bounciness out of a floor while you do some construction, maybe adding a little extra support in an area that you're putting a new kitchen island in that's a lot more weight than was before. But these are not meant to be permanent, and they're not meant to be in there for more than basically a half a year. So first, on older homes, those are the primary ones that we want to look at, and this would involve basically taking the floor, breaking it apart, digging down and putting in what's called a footer. And the footer is a large concrete pad that's going to be rebar reinforced, and that's what's actually taking the weight of the column and dispersing it into the soil. And so that's the critical element to the actual support mechanism of a lally column support. That pole is very strong, but if you're putting it on an old slab floor that might be an inch thick, it's just going to crack and it's going to sink down into the floor. So this large concrete footer is really what's taking the weight and spreading it evenly into the soil. Then you'd want to have a concrete filled steel lally column that's cut to size with a thick steel plate at the top to help save these older homes' wood structure, because if you put a really small square plate on there, it's going to cause what's called a point load onto the wood and will cause issues with the actual timber structure above. So older homes, you always want to look at these old wooden columns as replacements, and also these temporary columns or screw jacks as replacements. Now, if you have a home that's newer, than 100 years old, you're going to see a variety of different types of column supports. And some of them might actually be a new support that would be something that we would use today. The problem with these homes are typically they're usually buried into the concrete on the pad that's underneath. And if you have a high water table, or if you have them in a garage where you're constantly bringing cars in and out, the bottom can get really rusty, as well as it can wick water up and interior to the column and actually rust it from the inside out. And the column is a two-piece. It's concrete that is wrapped in steel, a steel tube. And they have to work together to give you the rated strength to it. So as the rusting and splitting of these columns happens, you're losing anywhere from 30 to 60% of the overall design strength of these columns. So if you're in your garage particularly and you're seeing this bottom foot or two that's really rusting, and you might even see parts of the concrete, it's time. Also, you might see these in the interior of the home where they're splitting or bubbling into the foundation, and they're splitting or bubbling interior to the piping. That means that water is coming up and through, and it's time as well to look at replacing those. The same design techniques as the older homes hold true. It's just a matter of making sure when it's time to actually replace them.